he grew up in Malacca. His father was an immigrant. They were very much a part of the Chinese community in Malacca. He was, in a sense, Malacca born, but he was Hokkien speaking Chinese. Tan Cheyenne was from one of the oldest elite families of the Straits Chinese, as you probably know. They all intermarried with each other, but he was starting the rubber industry. And Sim Hong Pek was an immigrant way back in the 1870s when he came as a boy, and he was working in the plantations and worked his way up. So back in Xiamen, in China, these families, not Tan Cheyenne's, but the Chan family, King Sui's family, and Sim Hong Pek's family, back 3 or 4 generations, these are kind of related families back in China. So, but their roots here in Malacca are all very different, and that's part of what point I wanted to make. Now, the middle school opened in 1925, and here is a student in the first year, 1926, going off to the middle school, the Kaifang Middle School. He actually is somebody. You know what this is? This is Sim Mo Yu. Now, we think of Sim Mo Yu as being 95 years old and dying. But Sim Mo Yu was at this point 13 years old, and he was just going to that middle school. And it was only a few years later that he had founded the night school at the St. John Society. Now, something to say about the schools in the early 30s. So before 1933, 3 years before 1933, the Chinese schools underwent a change of organization. They had a new board of directors. They had elections to the board. They were hiring new teachers. And they were doing all kinds of innovative things in creating education for Chinese kids. And they were connecting to other schools within Southeast Asia. And a lot of this was done under the direction of Ho Bao-jin, whom I'm going to come to in a minute and talk about more. Now, we should notice that, remember it's a private school. The funding for all private schools, grants and aids, were being reduced at this time. And they said, we don't want to fund these private schools anymore, but especially the Chinese schools. Because Governor Clemente, the governor at the time, was actually opposed to vernacular education for Chinese kids, especially Chinese kids. So we'll talk more about this later. But his policy was Malayanization, writing to Matt, that everybody should go to school from grade 1 in Malay language. We're going to end up with this problem at the end of the talk. But in any case, under these circumstances, the school is struggling to keep its autonomy. And it's also dealing with China. So in Republican China, the government, Culture Ministry, wants to control the schools in Southeast Asia. But the local people here, they want to lead, they don't want to follow. So they're sending people to China, to conferences in 1929 and 30, and they are making innovative statements about how we should develop the Chinese schools. And the person who is making that case for Malacca is Ye Hua Fan, who is the headmaster in 1933. It's a little piece of information, right? So they are talking about the content of the schools. They're talking about the libraries. We're going to share libraries. We're going to have interscholastic competition in sports. We're going to have interscholastic competition in competing for standard exams. We're going to have a standard of exams that's just like the Cambridge exams, and so on and so on and so on in the Chinese schools. And this school here was actually a leader in that case. All right, now we move to the St. John Society. The St. John Society in 1933 was having its 4th anniversary around October 10th, so it was new. The reporters referred to it as being the premier Chinese club in Malacca. Remember this time, Chinese club meant club for all Chinese. Straits-born, China-born, everybody in between, it's a Chinese club. And it was started in 1929 by the same Ho Bao-jin. We're going to talk about again in a minute. Now, this article is about the election of officers. So here's what I mean. If we have this thing, you can study this and find out who are all the people, who are the officers now in the St. John Society. And you can find all of your ancestors and all your friends' ancestors and all the rest of it, and figure out what was actually going on, who was doing what. Now, the Chinese night school also opened in 1933. That was in July. And this is Sim Mo Yu. He's at that point, he was already, 1933, he was 20 years old. And he opened the school and he spent the rest of his life running it. It was for male and female students who had to drop out of school because they had to work, or were going to English schools and wanted to learn Chinese, so they could do this in a high school. The article we're looking at here, however, is another one, and it is about the opening of the women's section of the St. Joe Society. And the authors are saying this is a very progressive move. The St. Joe Society has a ladies section, and it's going to be very active. And who should be elected the first president but Lim Guat-chu. And Lim Guat-chu is this lady's auntie, right? Who we just discovered this week, right? So that's kind of interesting for personal reasons. But think about what is going on progressively here. Here is courtesy of Audrey Lim with a photograph of the drama troupe at the convent. And over here in the corner, we have a photograph of the Guat-chu. So I'm very happy to have that. Now, another event related to St. John in July and August. Well, first of all, the famous Ho Bao Jin, who isn't famous yet, because I haven't introduced him, is being feted by 200 people at a dinner on July 24th. So this Ho Bao Jin is on his way to China, and he's representing a group of the Malay Union of Hokkieners, right? So this is an all Malaya unit, representatives going to Hokkien and to Fujian. What their plan is to finance and develop rural rehabilitation and urban infrastructure in Fujian, because they think they need help. Now this is not communist, but they're going to run into trouble when they get there. Anyway, they're feeding them on the way, lots of dignitaries there. And he returned in December. Now meanwhile, the Funan University volleyball team visited Malacca. We wonder, what the heck are these guys doing in Malacca? This is the university, Funan University in Shanghai, is becoming one of the premier universities in China. And their volleyball team is champion of all of China. And they've played in Southeast Asian games, and they're traveling around to Southeast Asian countries. They play basketball. So when you play in Malacca, you go to St. Joe, and you play basketball on the basketball court. They won. The Malacca boys lost. But they also were feted at the city park, and all the city fathers and influential people came and welcomed the park. Turns out, this fellow in the middle is the coach of the team. He's also the athletic director for the university, and he also is a native of Malacca over here. What does he do? His name is Peter Chen. Anybody knows anything can find this guy, I would love it. The article says Peter Chen is a native, and he was previously of SFI. All my friends at SFI can't find this guy. I think he must have been in the primary school. All right. But anyway, he was an athlete, very famous in China. Now, another just couple of things to mention. Same year, the Young Muslim Unions is debuting. And here is the Che Baba Bin Jardine, whom I do not know, was speaking to the organization and saying what we need to do is to, I think, the only means of improving ourselves is through cooperation with public spiritedness by which we could advance morally, physically, and intellectually. He could be making the speech at the St. Joan Society. It's exactly what they said. Morally, physically, and intellectually improving ourselves. He did not talk of Malay education. He talked of they're going to open up more jobs in the government and in influential places for Malays. We need to compete. So these are the educated Malays in Malacca speaking here. Now, at the same time, the Portuguese settlement is ready to open. So what do we got? We got the Malays organizing the Portuguese settlement about to open. We've got the Chinese schools thriving. We've got the women joining together in the St. Joan Society. And we got the Funan volleyball team and other things happening. Now, next I want to call attention to the Historical Society, because these are your predecessors. We are the heirs. This is your heritage. This is the Historical Society. What were they doing? Okay, they're celebrating their 6th anniversary. They're electing new officers. They're doing propaganda work. Right? So at this meeting, they're celebrating and they're saying, what have we accomplished in the last few years? we've been finding tombs, we've been finding all sorts of things up on St. Paul's Hill, we've been reviving them, we have been setting up a library, we're going to have a library, we're going to have another center, and the only thing we need is more members. And the government is saying to them, you know, please try to get more members because the government's helping to fund you and they want to know how you're spending the money. And so 20 new people signed up, right? So here tonight we'll have 20 more people sign up for the unofficial purchase. Okay, so this is what they were doing. I want to point out here who are the people who are running this show. So one of them is the Reverend Father Francois. He is the vice president, the president of the organization. And these are all the highly educated people, best educated people in Malacca. So Father Francois is the president. The vice president is A.L. Hoops, Dr. A.L. Hoops. He is a physician who has been the chief medical officer for the colony for very many years. Years on this. And they're all going to appear later in this talk. Then we have, we don't care about Boy Bowman very much. We have the Reverend Father Cardone, who is very active and very noisy guy. And then we have and Fun, BA. So we're going to look at these people a little bit more later. Then let's move on. Now I'm going to focus on some individuals, and time is wasting. The individuals will include Tan Chang Lak. Most of you remember Tan Chang Lak for MCA, right? And for the founding of the nation. But don't forget, Tan Chang Lak's story was, by this time, something like this. He was largely responsible for the incorporation of the rubber plantation that saved them from being bought up by outsiders in 1910. He was a Malacca commissioner in 1912, the legislative council for the colonies in 1923. So for 10 years he's been in that position, and the next year he gets made executive council. He's been arguing for Asiatic representation in these colonial bodies, and he's a major voice, right? These are images of him. This is in 1913, and we should notice that here he is with all his buddies in 1913, and this one is Chan Kong Sui. So they're part of this little network of stuff that's going on way back from 1913. Now, the next person is Chan Kong Sui. We're going to talk about him for just a minute. So I said, he grew up in Kampong Pantai, rubber plantation, Peifang. He was also Straits Chinese British Association president for quite some time. He was on the Chen Kung Teng Temple Committee, and he headed it for some time. And he was the biggest philanthropist around. So everything that gets money, funding, you hear about Chan Kong Sui. We're mentioning these people because we also want to think about how they form a network. Now here's Tan Chang Lak at home in Klebang, and this is just to, here's age 30. I don't know exactly when this is, but don't forget how Malay these people are, right? He's going to come up, he's a champion of the Chinese, but he is strictly old Babanonia family, you see? This is the way he likes to relax for photographs at home. So now, we got to move on to some more people. Tan Kah Kee, do you know the name Tan Kah Kee? Tan Kah Kee was the biggest guy in Singapore by this time. Now, he was the big kind of rubber magnate. He married a daughter to Lee Kong Chian. You probably heard of Lee Kong Chian. He's the big rubber magnate later on. Right. So Tan Kah Kee is interesting to us because of a marriage network. Turns out not only did he marry a daughter to Lee Kong Chian, he married a daughter and a son to a son and a daughter of Chan Kong Sui. So they were married twice. Chan Kong Sui married a son to a daughter of Tan Chang Lak. And the last one to join this neat little network of marriages was Ho Bao Jin, who we still haven't met. Now, Ho Bao Jin joined the network in 1926 when he came from a very different background. And now we're going to meet him a little bit. He happened to have gone to school with Lee Kong Chian. They were both in Singapore. And they got sent off to China in 1908, 1909. The Chinese, the Qing, the old imperial government, was recruiting students from Southeast Asia, Chinese students. And they were among these premier students to go to China at that time. Then later, Hou Baojin, who had been born in China, got a little bit of classical education, and was sent to Singapore as a boy, raised in Singapore, then sent to China for education. Then again went to China, and he went to where? Guess where? Fudan University. So the same Fudan in Shanghai is where he had been a student for many years. All right. Now, he's in Malacca in 1933 as the chairman. He's the manager of the overseas OCBC. And this is the new banking corporation that is just now managed to get Chinese control of the banking in this area. And he, as you know, also was the head of the St. Joe Society. He started it, he became chairman of the board of the payphone schools and everything else. And he married his daughter of Chan Kang Sui. All right. Now, in the meantime, he had a history before this, so here's what we got to look at. You don't know what this is. When he was at Fudan University in 1919, a big event happened in China. It was called the May 4th movement, the actual political May 4th, 1919. You heard of this thing? May 4th, 1919? This is a moment when the students in China massively went on strike. They went on strike to protest the Versailles Treaty, which was going to give a part of China, Shandong province, to Japan. This was a breaking of all the promises. So the students and the merchants and everybody, they went on strike. The leader of the student movement in Shanghai City, all the students of Shanghai, 20,000 students, leading a general strike of all the people of Shanghai, was Hou Baojin. So he was a 24-year-old student at Fudan University at this time, leading this massive strike movement in Shanghai. This is what he looked like at that time. He looked like a radical guy, right? He was this radical student leader, right? This was an immensely popular movement, very important to the history of China. And at Fudan University, here are the students, and there's Hou Baojin with the entire graduating, the entire junior class. The university was hardly even started yet. So these are the students, the boys, who, most of them in their early 20s, are out now leading this major political movement, this strike. This is from the same yearbook, and I want to point this out because this is a school that was organized by the students. It's a school for Shanghai kids, right? So something about Fudan University, we think about what was the ethos of the Chinese at this time. This was a place that was studying what American education was like. So they like liberal arts, they like citizenship, and they like social work. And so what these people are doing is organizing a school in which they are the teachers, but also they're recruiting trained teachers from teacher training schools elsewhere in China to educate this small bunch of kids on their campus. And then they're participating, they're giving them lunch money to help pay for it, right? So this is one of the progressive things that those people were involved in. So this is the origin actually of the Pingming school idea, free education for kids. Now, so this is where this Hou Baojin fellow had been, where he came from. He graduated and he went to the USA. He was at Washington University studying economics for 1 year, here he is, with his other colleagues from Fudan. And here he is, after he received a PhD in political science from the University of Illinois, and then returned to Fudan University. So now, along with other Chinese students who were with him at Illinois, he's joining the crew of college professors, college presidents, diplomats, important lawyers, who are all coming from the University of Illinois. And he starts the Division of Social Sciences at Fudan University. 1925 period. These are the overseas Chinese students. So they also organize Chinese students from all over Southeast Asia. Java, Sumatra, Philippines, the Malay Peninsula, at Fudan University. So they have a strong sense of identity of being of that group. Okay, so here he was. Now, in 1933, he's back here. And what do we see? This is, I just found this 2 weeks ago in Shanghai. First time I saw it. He's writing from, this is 1933, in May. He's writing on letterhead from the St. Joe Society. He's writing to Wang Yunwu, who's the director of the commercial press in Shanghai, the most important publisher in China, and he is writing him begging for discounts, begging for deals on Chinese books for the library at the St. Joe Society and the schools, because we're in a depression and we cannot afford. So now we get a sense of kind of the connections of where this goes. That is Hobart Dennis. And here he is after the war, because he didn't stick around, but after the war he came back, and here he is with Simo Yu, starting up in 1947, restarting the Chinese night school, and this is the women's choir of the Chinese night school. Right. Okay, so that's Hobart Dennis, and that's the other people. A couple other people come through. If anybody knows this guy, please let me know. This is Peter Chen, supposed to be a Malacca native. He has supposed to have a brother whose name was Han Jong Tek. We can look for Han Jong Tek, who was a planter in Guam. Right. Now, Peter Chen was also, by the way, the leader of the students and faculty who supported the 19th Route Army in Shanghai. So here he is in his 19th Route Army, got wounded. The students are supporting that 19th Route Army to fight the Japanese. This is also part of his reputation. So here we go with the connections. Very quickly, we move on now to a fellow called Yue Hua Fan. This is the only picture I have of Yue Hua Fan, right there. This is in Malacca in the beginning of 1934. Here's Yue Hua Fan. Here's Hobart Dennis over here. And here is Simon Peck. These are the Chinese notables greeting the new consul general from Singapore. And Yue Hua Fan now is going to introduce us to another dispute. I don't really have time to cover this little debate, but I want you to know is there was a debate. So the Historical Society was not there. They didn't sit around the table and just stare at each other. The Historical Society argued that sometimes they were really nasty. So Yue Hua Fan gave a chapter for the Rotary Club. He talked about the Anglo-Chinese College of Malacca. You heard of that one? Way back, 1818, was the earliest Protestant mission school in this part of the world. So it was to engage in the translation of Chinese to English and English to Chinese. The missionaries translated the Protestant Bible into Chinese. They had a printing press, very well organized, and they had quite a splash, right? So he's given this talk about his researches into what happened to that Anglo-Chinese college, because it didn't survive, right? And left to Hong Kong later because there was no people wanting to open up China. Okay, now, Father Francois disagrees. So Father Francois comes in and he says, you got it all wrong. He says the Malacca, or the Anglo-Chinese college was actually a failure. Trust me, I've got sources. So he starts bringing new evidence from the Singapore Free Press. It was a failure. It was a bust. These guys were bluffing. They didn't know anything. Look, everybody was opposed to them. And besides, that missionary now, he came to Malacca and he said, it's the Roman Catholics that have brought